Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nikolai DePippa. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Strategic Partnerships here at the Clinton School, and welcome to another one of our Distinguished Lecture Series. I wanted to first start with thanking Luis. Where is he? Oh, there he is in the back. Oh, no, wait. I want to see him and thank him. There he is. He was in the back. He was just hiding. All right. Thank you for helping put this together. One of the ways that we're able to do 120 of programs a year is through these partnerships and people coming and suggesting and helping put these together. So he was instrumental in bringing this here. I grew up in Stiff Station born in '84 and drove downtown. I didn't drive. My father and parents drove downtown, and it was a place that we didn't go. But I've seen it over the past 30-some years change. And I don't think there was ever a time when I was growing up of thinking how or what downtown revitalization was, but I'm glad that it happened. But before we started talking about this how and the why, I want you to kind of meet the who. So I want each of our panelists to describe who they are and who they work for, or what they do, and what that means to them. So we'll start at the end. Victor, grab that microphone in front of you. Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Victor Dover. I'm principal in charge of a town planning and urban design firm called Dover Cole & Partners. We draw pictures of the way things ought to be, and usually that means squinting at the way they look now and imagining how we might visualize good change before it occurs. That's what we do. And I think a lot about downtowns because most of our work is about the revitalization of historic areas. We have some experience as well on retrofitting suburbia, and often what that consists of these days is bringing some of the attributes of traditional towns and town centers to the suburbs that lack those features. So we can learn a lot by studying the existing downtowns. I urge people to think about them like a wildlife biologist thinks about a habitat. If it supports a lot of kinds of life, then it's probably a good place for human habitat. It's a good place for people to raise their young and forage for food and seek a mate and find their way. It's very different from the all driving all the time kinds of places that were built all over our country out on the edges of town. So I'll give you a little visual food for thought. A lot of what we do is work on undoing those mistakes, whether they're done to historic downtowns or to once beautiful green pastures. Often that means changing out something that's coarse-grained and brittle, rather as an investment and as a habitat, into something that is much more fine-grained and more resilient that way. One of our projects, which I think we'll get a question about later on, is in Montgomery, Alabama, another state capital. And in Montgomery, they had managed to choke off their downtown, make it a place that, while incredibly historic, the place where the Civil War started, the place where the Civil Rights Movement had a really important moment on the timeline. But they had managed to make it a place where people didn't go, just like you described. And Montgomery has been changing rather dramatically, especially as they put their streets back into a form that people recognize where they were disfigured. Still, it's not Paris. There's Paris. And so I put this picture here to get you thinking about what a downtown really is. A downtown is kind of like a big machine for exchanging ideas. We go there to do social and economic exchanges, but mainly what we're doing is we're running into other people and we're letting them find out what we've got, and they're letting us know what they have. In that sense, I think Ed Glazer's right when he refers to cities, especially their downtowns, as humankind's greatest invention. But in order to do that, you have to create a place where people want to be. And that means actually designing it, setting up that habitat where people can have a good time, and they'll choose it other places to hunt for food or raise their young. In Stockholm, on a winter afternoon, I was standing in a spot, and I thought I might get a great picture of this cyclist framed by these beautiful trees. And I waited there, and as he approached me, I realized he was whistling. He was whistling. He was on his 5 p.m. going home from work commute and having the time of his life. It was about 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit at the time. Don't tell me weather is a reason why people won't do this stuff. He was having the best part of his day. Now, how many of us can say when we're on our commute home, we're having the best part of our daily experience? Well, that's the way that city was designed. We have a lot of cities to fix and lots of addresses within them to fix. Here's one of my favorite pictures of Fayetteville, a town I love very much, worked in a lot, alongside Karen. You'll notice the bright yellow thing in the middle of the frame is a warning that pedestrians may be witnessed in this habitat. Now, this is right downtown, but it's a place that was reoriented around all driving all the time. So I think really what we have in America, most focused in downtowns, is this need to restore confidence that growth and change can make things better rather than worse. As Americans, we used to be very confident that we could make things better rather than worse by growing, that we would make them grow more charming and more elegant and more valuable and more functional. We could build our way out of problems. And we lost that confidence. We've instead created a whole civilization that's suspicious of growth and change, assuming that it will make things worse rather than better. But in places like Fayetteville, where that picture I just showed you was drawn, and Siloam Springs, also in northwest Arkansas, they're visualizing how they can make place again and build on what the best things that give them local distinctiveness. Sometimes it doesn't take much real estate. You can see that blooming that's happening in the River Market District. It's like dropping the pebble in the pond. There's a lot of lake to ripple out into. But often it just takes a single city block where if it changes from no place to a place people want to be, it can change everything. Jeanette Sadiq Khan in New York City over the last 10 years did a lot of things to reignite life in the streets of that city. And one of the things she did was send her crews out in the middle of the night to this corner in front of the famous Flatiron Building. And they painted epoxy on the street to make it look like you weren't supposed to drive on all that asphalt. And they brought out some boulders and some big potted plants and movable tables and chairs and dropped them in that space and made a pop-up plaza out of it. The next morning, New Yorkers came streaming out of those buildings and into that plaza and sitting at those tables and chairs as if they knew exactly what to do with such a space. So our species does remember how to do those things. Part of it is how we put buildings down. So on the subject of public and private partnership, you heard it here, all development is a public-private partnership. But the streets that we want to be on, the places where we like to be, are the ones where the position of buildings and the building-to-street relationship that's created by those private acts of building private buildings are what give the public room its shape and its quality. So I think that we have a lot to do to live up to the quality of our historic buildings in the infrastructure of our public streets. But if we do, downtown revitalization just gets more and more natural with every ripple of the pond. Thank you.
Well, my introduction of myself is not going to be near as long.
You want any pictures?
Well, no, you got your. I hope everybody got their own slideshow on their drive here. So my name is Gabe Holmstrom. I'm the director of the Downtown Little Rock Partnership, and welcome to Downtown Little Rock. I don't have the breadth or width of expertise that Victor does, as next week will mark my first year on the job. The good news is I've had the benefit of being in the same room as a lot of people in this room over the past year, and it's been a amazing experience to witness some of the growth that we've seen, not only in the past year, but the past 5 years, the past 10 and 20 years. As an adult, I chose to move back to downtown after living my childhood in one of the bedroom communities of Little Rock. So I made a conscious decision to live downtown, to bring my family downtown and make a life downtown. And I would venture to say I'm one of the few people in this room whose office is on the same city street as their home. And I'm very proud of that, and I bet you're very jealous of that. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thanks. My name is Karen Minkel, and I'm the Home Region Program Director for the Walton Family Foundation. And I've been in this role for about a year. I've been with the foundation for 4 years. For the first 3 years, I worked in research and evaluation supporting the home region work. But I think what's probably most helpful is if I give you some of my professional background before that because it will explain the lens that I bring to the table today. And I, after completing my undergraduate degree, joined Teach for America and taught in West Harlem for 3 years and decided that I wanted to go into public policy. And so after completing a degree in public policy, I moved to Fayetteville, Arkansas, because that's where my husband grew up. And after visiting a few times, I fell in love with the place. I grew up in Central California, and there aren't many town squares there. And after we moved here, I just met with anyone who had anything to do with public policy and found myself working for the city of Fayetteville in long-range planning. And quickly found that in an area that's experiencing that much growth, that's where all the policy work is happening, is in planning and development. And it was important for a number of reasons. I fell in love with urban planning. I met Victor Dover, who was working on our comprehensive land use plan. I actually met Greg as well because I was staffing the Historic District Commission. And it really influenced, I think, my thinking about how growth and development can make things better because they can add this vibrancy to your downtowns and how you can mitigate a lot of the challenges that also come with that growth. And in the foundation, a couple of years ago, we were working on our 2020 strategic plan. And the Home Region program works specifically in Northwest Arkansas and the Arkansas and Mississippi Delta. And we invest over $40 million per year in those two geographic areas. In Northwest Arkansas, we have 4 strategies, and one that came out of our 2020 strategic planning process was preserve a sense of place. And that's where downtown revitalization fits in. And I'll talk a little bit more about how we developed that plan and why we think it's so important to Northwest Arkansas.
Thank you, Karen. I'm Greg Phillips, Director of Main Street Arkansas. I've been with Main Street for it'll be 20 years this year, but came at it with no background or no knowledge of downtown revitalization, historic preservation whatsoever. I actually moved to Arkansas. I went to school here, went to Ouachita, got a degree in music, went home for a little while, came back and worked for the Arkansas Symphony as marketing and PR director, and just happened to fall into the Main Street job, but have been there ever since. And really, it's a passion of mine. I love what I do each and every day. For those of you who aren't familiar with Main Street, we are a preservation-based economic development program that works with historic downtown commercial centers as well as neighborhood business districts. We are part of the Arkansas Historic Preservation Program, which is an agency of the Department of Arkansas Heritage. And we are also part of Main Street America, which is a program of the National Main Street Center. So that's me.
I wanted each of you to kind of touch on this briefly of why does it matter? Why does downtown matter, and why can't we just let people live and work and do things where they want to do it?
Well, oftentimes, one of the things that's said again and again until it's almost cliche, but it's really true, is downtown is the heart of the city. And it's easy to say that and gloss over that, but it really is true. And when you see what has happened in our downtown in the past several decades, you can really see, I don't know the medical term for this, but there's really been a jump start added to the heart of our city. So it's important, and traditionally the downtown has been the center of commerce. Before things started changing decades ago, downtown was where people came to do their shopping. It was where they ate. It was where a lot of the big businesses were located. For a variety of reasons that we all know and have somewhat differing opinions about, those started to change. But what you're seeing not only in Little Rock and then places in Northwest Arkansas, but all across the country, is downtowns are experiencing a rebirth, where you're seeing people this millennial group that is mystifying, and everybody has their own opinion on what millennials want, and they don't want cars, they want to walk everywhere and text while they walk. But maybe that too. But they want to be in a downtown in an urban environment, and we're seeing that. So this shift away from the suburbs is bringing people back to downtown, and I think it's an exciting time to watch and participate in this.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll just say this, since if you zoom out a little bit on the timeline and realize that the last 50, 60 years of the 20th century were a historical aberration, downtown is where people want to be, because two roads, cross in the middle of a cow pasture somewhere, and somebody decides that's the place to put a trading post, or there's a spot where the river is shallow enough or bridgeable enough to ford it or cross it, and that's where somebody puts the outfitters and where the commerce started going back and forth. And guess what? They grew towns from those places. So actually, transportation had a whole lot to do with the evolution of towns since time immemorial, but especially in America, where we perfected successive generations of transportation technology and then shaped towns around them. So no big surprise that after the 1939 World's Fair and the incredible propaganda push that declared downtown dead and declared the future was Futurama on wheels, there was this great experiment conducted first on a continent-wide basis and then globally without any field test to see what would happen if you subjected a species to an absolutely entirely different way of growing cities and living. And no surprise, 20th century ended and people are flowing back into the more natural habitat. Now, that doesn't mean that we'll abandon the suburbs. In fact, we probably need to sustain, given our upcoming population growth over the next 20, 50 years, we're going to need to sustain substantial growth in the suburbs as well as in the historical town centers. But I don't know, when I grew up, we watched the Brady Bunch and reruns of Leave It to Beaver and stuff like that, and those all took place in the burbs. You grew up, I bet you watched Friends and Sex and the City and Seinfeld.
Sex and the City mostly.
And so I think one of the things that's happened is that cities went from being on the list of what's not cool to being on the list of what is cool. And I think a lot of what we hear about the millennials, Gabe, is also true of what we hear regarding empty nester baby boomers, that they want to be in a place where they can walk to a sidewalk cafe. That's kind of obvious. A place where there's some caffeine handy, and maybe not too far from where the action is. And that, of course, describes those social and economic exchanges I was talking about in the beginning. I think the real question is going to be, can we get just as many or more of those social and economic exchanges to happen without choking on traffic to do it? Yes.
I would just add that from an economic development standpoint, if your downtown is not healthy and vibrant, when businesses and corporations come to look at your community, and you may know they're there and you may not, chances are you're not going to know it when they initially come. If they come into a downtown that is dirty, a lot of vacancies, nobody around, they're going to move on to the next community. And so certainly for all the reasons that have been mentioned, I absolutely agree with that, but it's just very important from an economic development standpoint that we have downtowns, whether they're large urban centers or our small towns in the Delta, that those downtowns are as vibrant and full of life as we can make them.
Well, and the foundation invests in downtown revitalization for all the reasons just mentioned. I mean, the ultimate goal in Northwest Arkansas is to attract and retain employees at all levels. And so whether we are looking at national research or conducting hyper-local research, what we hear is very similar, that our young professionals want sophisticated downtowns where they have multiple cultural offerings. And we think it's critical to economic development efforts. And we also see it, two sides of the same coin. How can we protect our natural assets in the time of tremendous growth? Well, we want to direct the growth so that it preserves those natural assets. And as we grow our downtowns and direct growth in that direction, we see a more vibrant urban landscape for the area. But I think that personally, and this is sort of the lofty idea of downtowns, I think in some ways they're a microcosm of democracy. I think they're one of the few places where you experience community and you aren't choosing the people who are going to share that public space with you. And so we navigate this public realm and have the opportunity to interact with people from all walks of life. And I think there's something that's beautiful about that and representative of who we are as a country.
Can we expand on kind of the Walton Family Foundation and how this does fit into their kind of investment strategy and what that means?
Sure. In Northwest Arkansas, we have 4 strategies that we invest in. One is coordinated regional economic development. And then there are 3 strategies that I think are wonderful in and of themselves, but our goal is always to create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. And so I think that when we have a good investment, it's because it's touching a number of strategies. And one of those is arts and culture. One is pre-K through 12 education and creating a world-class system of schools. And then the last is what we call preserve a sense of place. And we had a number of investment areas that were spread out across multiple strategies. And when we were creating the 2020 strategic plan, we heard from a number of family members some concerns about the growth in Northwest Arkansas and how it was perhaps contributing to sprawl, and how could we protect some of our beautiful natural assets, but also revitalize our downtowns and make them these vibrant spaces again and create a series of cool neighborhoods throughout the region. And so we pulled together all the investments that we were making related to land use, and this included funding downtown organizations and downtown revitalization efforts. It included our trail network in providing another transportation choice, and it included a number of the investments we were making in terms of water quality and protecting riparian areas. But we added a few more pieces to it as well. So one, we would invest in our elected officials and planners and engineers by offering them education opportunities to interact with top urban planners and designers across the country, whether we were sending them to national conferences or we were inviting those with incredible expertise back into the region to work with them. We would fund master plans that emphasize smart growth principles, both downtown master plans as well as comprehensive land use plans. And we launched a design excellence program, and the idea was to elevate the design of our public spaces and buildings. And we created a pool of architecture firms as well as landscape architecture firms and choose 2 or 3 projects each year that then pull from these firms. All of the projects to date are located in downtowns in Northwest Arkansas. So when I talk about the strategies interacting, it's because if we're looking at an arts and cultural investment, we're looking to make sure it's within a downtown. Every capital investment we make generates growth and drives economic development. And so as much as we can direct those to our downtowns, we think we're also helping to revitalize the downtown simply by making those investments. And I think the trail system is a wonderful example of how we're actually achieving 2 things by investing in that system. We are serving as a catalyst for downtown revitalization efforts as it runs through these downtown cores. And then as it runs through our rural areas, we're able to protect some of our valuable natural assets. So that's how we arrived at the downtown revitalization. It's a piece within this idea of how we preserve a sense of place in Northwest Arkansas.
Gabe, will you talk about Little Rock and what have they done right and maybe a missed opportunity here or there?
Certainly. I think it's, let me look around the room we're in. The number one thing is very easy to say what we got right is making sure that the Clinton Library was located here in Little Rock. The number $2 billion in growth since the library has been located here in Little Rock has been batted around, and I bet that's every bit true, and probably then some. The walking paths, the sculpture garden, the bridge, the walkable bridges that we have around the city, I think those have been some very great successes from a policy standpoint. in 2009, this is more of a statewide effort, but the historic tax credits were passed on the state level. So that has had an impact here in downtown. That's led to, what did I write down, $4.5 million worth of state tax credits, which has generated about $54 million worth of rehabilitation of buildings. So $54 million goes a long way on old buildings. We had a great library director in Bobby Roberts, who was a visionary and invested $40 million in the river market and building a state-of-the-art library system. We were able to get the tech park to locate downtown. So it's going to start construction later this year, and that's hopefully to be the boon that we all want it to be. Some of the missed opportunities, shall we say, I think most folks that love to bring up the example of FedEx and what could have happened there. For the details on that, I'll let Craig Douglas talk about that. But I think that, that certainly, again, that was before I was born. But it obviously would have turned out a little bit differently then. The Culinary Institute with Pulaski Tech, we got in the game late for downtown to bring that downtown. That would have been an amazing opportunity. One of the things that's been relayed to me is that free land has often created incentives for people to go other places. UALR is located where it is due to free land, just like the IMAX Theater was. And UALR is clearly an asset, but can you imagine if it was located right downtown? I think of all of these things and of all of maybe the missed opportunities, the one that is most clear to me when you take a step back and look at all of this is, and this may get me in some hot water, but why do we have a North Little Rock and a Little Rock? Imagine where we would be if this was all one city. And apparently our forefathers 100 years ago got mad, and here we are today as a result of that. But imagine if this was all one municipality. I think we would look at things a little bit differently. But that's my 2 cents.
Greg, will you talk about historic preservation and the challenges in revitalization and maybe some of the opportunities that it lends as well?
Sure, absolutely. Obviously, I'm a little biased because of what I do, but I really think that historic preservation and downtown revitalization go hand in hand. I work all across the state in communities, big and small. I travel. I seek out those unique places when I travel, and I really can't think of or identify an example of a sustained success story in a downtown where historic preservation was not a key strategy or a key component in that strategy. I suppose that it's possible that you could have that, but I have not seen it. We all are familiar with urban renewal and the lovely thing that was, and that served to decimate so many of our downtown commercial cores, certainly in our larger cities. So that was not a good thing. But I also think the relative importance of preservation as part of any downtown revitalization effort varies some, depending on your local resources. All of our communities are different. Our capacities are different. The age of the city, the strength of the local preservation program, if there is one. Is there a Main Street program locally? Things like that. But I really feel strongly that successful revitalization program without historic preservation just doesn't happen.
Victor, you mentioned some of these success stories that you've worked on, but kind of go into what they did to get there, whether it be policy, investment, or combination.
Glad to. Well, and of course, I think that if we look at the dramatic change in downtown Fayetteville, actually, since the creation of their downtown master plan, and the investments that Karen was talking about that took place there, they bear out what Greg has just described about the essential thing you start with is historic preservation. I think actually for a couple of generations, historic preservationists have been the shock troops of urban revitalization. You know, they were interested in the old things, even if they were dusty and had to be dusted off. And they were interested in very local, place-based things, the things that gave a place local distinctiveness. Well, it turns out that to have a successful and competitive, thriving downtown, like any place, it has to be someplace that people want to be, and that means more texture and quality that they feel they can't get somewhere else. It has to be best of kind at something. And there was a period of time in which the suburban shopping mall was best at, well, air conditioning the sidewalk where you would walk between storefronts. It was best at that, and it was great at parking and a few other things. And so that was their competitive strategy. But in the end, all we got from that was commodity real estate, a certain number of square feet devoted to retail, or in the office parks, a certain number of square footage of office space or floor plates. Planning by the numbers, in essence, in which every square foot was like every other square foot. But in downtown and in historic streets and in historic buildings, every square foot is not like every other square foot. There's some way that loft or that old warehouse converted or that beautiful Capitol Hotel restoration is different from the other things around it, and that's how it competes. It's best of kind at that. So if I look at the successful turnarounds in small towns like the many college towns where we're lucky to work, like Iowa City or Chapel Hill or Flagstaff, they all start with that. And if I look at the successful turnarounds in big cities, same thing. Their historic downtown starts from local distinctiveness. Now you can support that with tax credits. I was shocked when you said 2009, because that's a little late to be enacting that important 1970s reform. But I'm glad it's there because you can see it's already bearing fruit. But all the cities that have been through this have learned from that start. Now today the shock troops may be a little different. Cyclists, stick up for my party here. The cyclists are another group of the new shock troops of urban revitalization. Very interesting group of people. They are interested in a shorter commute rather than a longer one. And they are interested in streets in which the flow is slow rather than fast. And that means they're probably interested in being able to stop when they see something of interest right there and take a look at it in that storefront instead of having to circle the block and the one-way streets and look for parking. They tend to infuse a lot of life. That's why I was delighted to see the bike shop in the River Market building. It's kind of like a anchor tenant in the revitalization bloom you have going on here. So it's just a different set of ingredients. You're no longer competing on seeing how cheaply you can deliver commodity real estate. You're seeing how expressively you can add a lot of cool to a place. Then people will choose it, even if they have to go farther to get to it or even pay a little more per square foot for it. Then that's the secret.
I want to open it up for questions and hear what y'all want to talk about. So if you raise your hand, we can get a microphone to you. Olivia, 1 second. Bob's coming with a microphone. I saw him. Here he comes. Bob, right here.
I'm surprised no one's mentioned it, but I'm overcome with existential dread when I think about what the highway department is going to do right there on I-30 and the Broadway Bridge already. And I just wonder if that's not a step backwards, because it seems like it's pretty easy to snuff out what we've got, the little fire we've got going downtown. And I'd like y'all to talk about that a little bit.
Who wants to start?
Victor, weren't you nominated back there to be the spokesperson for the panel on this?
Yeah, for the record, I am not a car-hating horse and buggy planner, although I have a car and I drive it often, although I just don't want to be a slave to it. So my comments that you're hearing don't come from a car hater. But the idea that you could actually have car culture and make driving a choice rather than a prerequisite for survival is a pretty key thing to happen. If you activate the other modes of travel, walking, biking, transit. By the way, I don't refer to walking and biking and transit as alternate modes of travel. They were the original modes. And then you can accommodate a lot of trips and a lot of movement, a lot of those exchanges I talked about without necessarily requiring a car trip and 14 car trip parking spaces waiting for you all around town. So I think this big question that you're facing, just from reading a few of the newspaper articles and editorials, I read the Chamber's position paper and a few things. What's the acronym? AHTD? That sounds like a diagnosis. Sorry. So I know only just a little bit about the 30 crossing controversy, and an instinctive response is if you're taking time as a community to have a big, calm community conversation about this before you make another massive investment in car infrastructure, that's probably wise. You may, in the end, decide to do it or some version of it anyway, but a pause to give yourselves enough time to consider all the pros and cons would be worth it. Remember that experiment, completely unprecedented, no field test, in seeing what would happen if we flung the interstate highway system all over the country and decanted the economic power of our downtowns out into the hinterland. Those decisions were made really very quickly. There's a 1955 issue of Collier's magazine, which has a beautiful editorial praising the federal government for instituting the Interstate Highway Act. And there's a line which I'll never forget. It says, we need to move, we need to flow. This was the first need. Subordinate details be hanged. Okay, so little details, like whether your road projects make it impossible to walk back and forth across your town as a pedestrian, or whether you're tearing out big chunks of community fabric that may have already been traumatized by the last round of such projects, was considered as one of those subordinate details. So I would urge just a lot of caution. We have these things going on all over the country. Don't think that 30 Crossing is unique. We just spent enough money on a rebuild of an interchange in Miami between two major expressways. Enough money that had they postponed the project for 10 years, they would have saved enough money. Even if they built it then, they would just on the cost of money, they would have had enough money to restore the entire historic city of Miami streetcar system. Those projects are not cheap. And so they're forever decisions, essentially. Does that help? I had to go more into it.
What, Brandon?
Is it one way?
Would each of you say something about the help you need from either state government or federal government to institute legislation that would enable you to do your job better and perhaps as well as possible?
I'm so glad you asked. You heard Victor express a little bit of amazement at the 2009 of Arkansas just passing the Arkansas Historic Tax Credit. So while we have made a lot of progress, one of the things where we still are behind is the limits that are in place with the policy as the tax credit as it stands. For example, I think everybody in this room, Representative Sabin, I hope you're taking notes. I know. I saw you smiling. Everybody's familiar with the Boyle Building downtown. So estimates. Let's just call it for easy math. Say it's going to take $20 million to renovate that building. As the law currently sits today, the maximum tax credit in the state of Arkansas that would be available for that would be $125,000. So a developer comes along and spends $20 million, and they'd get a $125,000 tax credit. Well, let's go to Mississippi. Again, I said Mississippi. That same building is in Mississippi. The same developer that has the same $20 million will get a $5 million tax credit. Where do you think that developer is going to go risk his $20 million or invest his $20 million? So I think that would be the first thing that I would say. I think some of the other municipalities, I believe there's a constitutional issue that comes up with giving our municipality the ability to offer a tax rebate, but across the country, some of the other cities do have the ability to offset taxes for a period of years based on the amount of investment that is done in a city core. I think that's something that can be looked at, but it would have to be addressed with a constitutional amendment as well. Those are the first two. I'll pass from there.
Well, I'll echo what Gabe said. Being part of state government, I can't say a whole lot because I can't. But I would say, but we can educate. And so I would just say that's really a crucial component to moving so many of these projects forward. So many times that tax credit, both the state and the federal, are the mechanisms that are going to make a project go or not. And so if that cap can be raised on the state tax credit, that's going to make a huge difference. And so I would just suggest that you call your legislators and ask them to call Representative Sabin and get this thing done, because it's really important. I would also say, as just Main Street Arkansas, selfishly, we are funded mostly by the real estate transfer tax. So please go buy property as much as you can. But I say that jokingly, but with a little seriousness. We're very fortunate. We have a staff of 5, and myself, Samantha Evans, who's over here, our assistant director, and also a team of technical assistance experts, an interior designer, a small business consultant, and an exterior designer. And those folks travel all over the state working in our downtowns, and their services are free to any merchant or property owner who has a business or owns property in that specific downtown if they're part of our network. So we're just really fortunate that we have a staff of that size here in Arkansas to do those things. So keep buying property.
I won't put more on your plate, Representative Sabin, at this point, but I actually think that in Northwest Arkansas, and when I think about how we view philanthropy as being catalytic, I think the key question for us is not so much about state and federal law, but it has to do with local municipalities and how much public support they will ultimately put toward some of these catalytic investments. So when we think about the Razorback Greenway and the trail network that's being created in Northwest Arkansas, a key question is how long and will the cities maintain an extensive trail network? How much will they contribute in terms of the capital investment up front, and then how much will they contribute to sustaining long term? And that's certainly true of public infrastructure. And I think there are important questions about water quality and what the political will is to implement policies that will also help protect our water quality in the region. So I think our questions are much more about local municipalities and their willingness to partner short-term and long-term in a lot of these projects.
Just a couple of suggestions, first local ones and then for the state. local, if you haven't already done it, at least in the areas in which you would like to create a thriving, walkable public realm, like a downtown. You should eliminate minimum parking requirements. It's amazing to see how many of your exciting and slick new buildings with offices and hotel rooms and residences in them that are bringing 24-hour life are sitting on top of giant silos of parking. I looked today. There are not that many people parking in those. And it's a hugely questionable use of land, especially in light of all the technological changes that are coming with motoring. So I would urge local government to, if they haven't already done it, eliminate minimum parking requirements. And on top of that, if they haven't already done it, eliminating minimum lot size for a developable piece of property. Because the idea that you have to assemble a huge blob of land to do a really big project, usually made big by the sheer fact that a big efficient garage is an efficient garage, means you have to have big land, right? So you buy a whole city block or combine a couple of city blocks in order to do the mega parking garage necessary to satisfy the minimum parking requirements. Guess what? You have to do big boxy buildings and big projects that require giant investment, roll of the dice risks. And take big law firms and big architecture firms and big developers to do them. And it would be great if instead of looking for the next $200 million project, you could have $201 million projects on smaller sites that didn't have those burdens in the land development regulations that come from things like the minimum parking requirements. Those are local suggestions. For the state, first, drop the H in the name of your transportation department. There are only a few state transportation departments left that have the word highway in the name. That's a very retrograde idea. It comes from the time when the federal government was doing a huge high-octane mix of money to entice states to build more of that drive everywhere for everything infrastructure. The idea was somehow if we drove more, it would get cheaper by the mile. And so next, rework the objectives of that department so that instead of saying the goal is to have the highest possible level of service, meaning free-flowing traffic at the peak hour, the goal is to see how many vehicle miles traveled per person you can reduce. When a project is being judged, an investment is being judged, it ought to be judged based on how many miles of travel it can eliminate the need for. In that way, the saying goes, the best transportation plan for a city is a good land use plan. And the state, rewarding lane miles created, that's sort of a policy devised by asphalt mongers for asphalt mongers. That's not a good way to go. What you need to do instead is say, how can we move more of the newly created trips that come with the natural evolution of our state and growth? How can we move more of those trips to walking, biking, and transit where they're not choking the planet and choking the streets? Instead of seeing how high a level of service we can create. Because the free-flowing condition, which motivates projects like the one you talked about, that goal is, first of all, unattainable. You cannot build your way out of congestion. It's simply a matter of how many lanes would you like to have your congestion. Would you like to have your congestion with 6 lanes, 8 lanes, 10 lanes? Because induced travel simply means we're going to drive more when we build more infrastructure for it. It's a pent-up demand. It's not the buildings and their occupants that are creating the traffic. It's the highways that induce highway traffic. So refocus that department. Don't say, get us the highest level of service and lay as many lane miles as you can. Say, reduce our vehicle miles traveled as much as you can, and that is how you'll get the financial reward in the state budget.
Hi, my name is Jenna Rhoads, and I am a Class 8 graduate of the Clinton School. And thank you all so much for coming and sharing your knowledge with us tonight. I am really interested. I work in 2 neighborhoods in North Little Rock on neighborhood revitalization, and I'm curious as to your opinions on, it's not a downtown per se as it is down here, but I'm curious if you would recommend focusing on the residential component first, the commercial component first, a mix of both. And then also, could you speak to using revitalization as a way to address racial and socioeconomic inequalities in terms of, I'm interested in it in the residential way, so what have you seen in terms of requiring a certain percentage of mixed income housing and things like that? Thank you.
the out-of-town guy. Should I say something controversial just since I'm from out of town? I work a lot in Arkansas. I like your question a lot. Well, first of all, chicken or egg regarding residential or commercial or or government components. The truth is that real towns have all those things. They always have, like forever. They've been places where, for our convenience and for security and for commerce and because we're social beings, people come together in towns. So you have to become a magnet for all those activities. And when we experimented with making downtowns central business districts, in which it was just supposed to be a business place and the bedroom communities were where everybody slept, that was an experiment that had never been tried before, really. All it did was really just maximize the amount of misery stuck in behind the wheel. So, and expense. Right now we're back to cheap gas, so we're doing things that seemed kind of rational at $30, $40 a barrel. They seemed questionable at $100 a barrel, and when we were back to $300 a barrel, they will be utterly unthinkable. So, for that reason alone, we need to have the full mix of uses. Now, some places start with entertainment and restaurants and tourists, and they're drawing on whatever they have. If they can show off the town to visitors, like this is a very common strategy for getting the spark going. But other places, will start with something much smaller than the giant convention center or the restaurant row. They'll start with the downtown Christmas tree lighting ceremony or the 4th of July parade and festival. So what's beautiful about the National Main Street program is it has this set of multiple strategies, classically 4, right, that involve design and events and organization, economic repositioning. And they don't advise that you just take on one of those things, but that you work them all together. What I think is more important is to focus on a place and get it all done in one place as much as you can. Create as close to the postcard environment of the future. If you can stand in one intersection and get a 360-degree view of what the downtown is supposed to be like again when the lights are all back on and the historic buildings are buffed up and there are people around. In other words, it looks like the historic photographs. Then people can imagine that happening on the next block. And you are seeing that already with revitalization turning the corner on Main Street and after being limited in the first 10, 15 years. So I think that's it's really more important to pick a place and focus entirely on it, and not just on the street feel or on the tenant mix. Not just on that, but also on the whole way of living there, so that if you have public transportation that people will actually choose as a real option, then that gives that place an advantage over its competitors that have to surround themselves with lots of parking in order to attract the same tenant. On your question about equity, I think the experience we see is that towns go through this molting phase or succession where at first they're just trying to get something going. They found a faint pulse and they try to hammer the chest of that downtown to get it beating again. And anything at all you can do to get transactions happening and get people turning the lights back on, you do, right? And after a while, when real estate values are restored and people start competing with each other to be in that place and rents begin rising faster than incomes in that place, that's when you're going to say, oh, wait, we should have had a mixed income development strategy in place. So what I say to people is, you may not need to institute drastic measures or huge investments in workforce housing and affordable housing from the very first day, but you better create a culture that's expecting that investment will be required eventually. If you want affordable housing, you have to make a social investment in it. And there are plenty of places that have the kind of inclusionary housing policy that you described. I'm glad you used the words mixed income, because I think it's really important to have some of the folks who have lots of choices and can choose to go live anywhere, choose to live in that place. For all of the defense of that place that they'll bring and the investment that they'll bring, the confidence. but you want to get to the point where later on you wake up and it still feels like that real place, the democratic environment that Karen described. In order to do that, you're going to have to make an investment in affordability. That may be through requiring the developers to include mixed income housing in each project above a certain size. Caution, a cautionary note here. The first thing to do is attract developers who are interested in that for its own sake, because they just get it, and there are those developers. And before you have to do it with rules. But if you only have a faint pulse, adding more rules right at the beginning is not the place to start, because that discourages or inhibits investment. So right now we need to be pounding the chest and getting that heart beating. Does that help?
We have time for one more. 1 second. It's coming right behind you. Thanks.
I wanted to ask you, Karen, to tell us more about the foundation investing in educating elected officials, and would you consider investing in Little Rock also? You mentioned Northwest Arkansas, and it's wonderful. And how do we get more foundations or people in our community to invest in our city, in our downtown particularly?
So a couple of responses. The home region focuses solely on Northwest Arkansas and the Arkansas and Mississippi Delta, but on April 22nd, yes, on April 22nd, the region is hosting a placemaking summit, and it's attracting people from, I think, a 3-state area at this point. And
yeah, I'm coming from Miami. Is that a 4th state?
yeah, yes, and Florida. And and we're bringing in fantastic speakers. Victor will be there, as well as many others from across the country. But it's really an opportunity for some of our municipalities to talk about their downtown master plans and challenges and successes they've encountered in terms of implementation, and to get feedback from all these people in the room. And then the weekend, this is a Friday, and then the weekend folds into a developers boot camp, actually to talk about small development projects and how to get financing for those. I think what they'll be discussing at this conference is relevant to any elected official, I would say, across the country. So I think opportunities like that are would be wonderful to have participation from across the state. In terms of foundations being interested in this kind of work, I was delighted that the Walton Family Foundation found this as a strong area of interest, because because I care about my community. I think it's critical, and then certainly my background lent itself to working in this area. Other foundations are interested in this work. There's an organization called the Funders Network, and it's composed of philanthropies who are interested in this kind of work. I will say that I think, not surprisingly, I think a lot of times it stems from the philanthropist's personal connection to the area. So certainly in the case of the Walton Family Foundation, it's because family members have grown up in Northwest Arkansas, they care deeply about it, and also have traveled the world and have seen wonderful places, and they want Northwest Arkansas to rank right up there with the places we all think about as being idyllic, like the Parises, right, of the world. I suspect that's probably how it starts for a lot of philanthropies. But I would look at the Funders Network and explore some of the philanthropies that are engaged in this kind of placemaking work. Others at the table might have additional ideas about philanthropies that are engaged in kind of placemaking, sense of place, urban planning work.
The Baton Rouge Area Foundation, or BRAF, is another model. And they don't just work in Baton Rouge, but they actually operate a REIT, a real estate investment trust, that owns a ton of commercial property in a lot of states and Puerto Rico, and then they take the income off of that and do all sorts of great things for Baton Rouge and New Orleans and other places where they work. And so there's another place-based strategy in terms of how they invest. And the revitalization in Baton Rouge has followed this pattern that we've been describing: historic preservation coupled with culture and local distinctiveness. They lead the way. In fact, they funded a Center for Planning Excellence for Louisiana. That is a very interesting model. They They provide a lot of help to small local governments that couldn't do that themselves, and all because the foundation led the way. Similarly, if you go to Chattanooga, the Lyndhurst Foundation leads the way. Lyndhurst family money comes from Coca-Cola bottling plants. And I think Chattanooga is a really relevant example for much of the heartland, because they were described in the national press as the dirtiest little city in America. Terrible label, right? They were a Rust Belt economy in a Sun Belt location. And I'm impressed with Chattanooga partly because at that moment, they did not do what most of our client cities would run out and do. They did not hold a press conference to deny it. Instead, they kind of embraced it, and of course, Al Gore was very involved in that, and they decided to become the poster child city for sustainability, for green thinking, and also for preservation and downtown revitalization, for cleaning up their river and so forth. And they pulled that off. But part of the way they did it was getting the Lyndhurst Family Foundation involved with the public-private partnerships and the development of really a reboot of their town building culture around the idea of great addresses, walkable streets, better transportation, greenness. And it really worked. Now, downtown was pretty quick. They did their riverfront and the flashy aquarium, and they did at first very high profile and slick projects that were kind of like putting the paddles on that heart patient I described before. But then they also ran a free shuttle through the downtown that started making it really easy to move back and forth on Main and Market. It's still the south side in Chattanooga, south of the TVA headquarters, languished. There were burned out buildings, people living in trees, lots of vacant land, a very awkward mix of abandoned industrial properties. One neighborhood is literally called Rustville, that's its official name. Another neighborhood there in the south side is called Fort Negley, but everybody called it Fort Neglect. This is how bad the reputation there became. But if you go to the south side now, it is on fire with success. It's a very interesting build your way out of your problems thing. Lyndhurst and Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise went in first. They acquired property, they led the way, they told the story, much like you've been telling for downtown here, and restored people's confidence. And then one building at a time, they started building back the neighborhood. And now you go, they have the best school, they have the best restaurants, and they have the happening scene in what was the bombed out part of town.
Two funders come to mind. One is more of a granting organization, and that would be Project for Public Spaces. They do some really good, or fund some really good placemaking projects all across the country, and actually they've just started a partnership with Main Street America and the National Main Street Center. The other would be the Arkansas Community Foundation. I don't know exactly what they fund specifically, but there are about 27 affiliates all across Arkansas that focus on regional funding projects in those regions, and so they are all across the state. So they're based here in Little Rock, so if you're interested, you can call somebody at the Arkansas Community Foundation. They're down in the old train station. We have a representative here, actually, Sarah, or a local affiliate across the state, yeah.
Well, thank all of you for coming out this evening, and let's thank our panelists for that discussion.